The final brushstroke was less a dab of paint and more a declaration of independence. There, on the front door of my house, was a perfect, deep, luscious coat of forest green. I stood back on the freshly cut lawn, the late afternoon sun warming my face, and admired my handiwork. It was the color of old money and quiet dignity, the color of a British racing car, the color of a goddamn forest. It was, in a word, perfect. This was it. The culmination of a decade spent cramming my life into a series of increasingly expensive, soul-crushingly beige apartments. My last place, a fifth-floor walk-up I'd affectionately nicknamed the Lung Box, had neighbors who communicated exclusively by screaming, and a landlord whose definition of plumbing repair involved suggesting I use the gym shower down the street. I'd saved every penny I made from my freelance graphic design work, surviving on instant noodles and the sheer power of spite, all for this moment. Maple Creek Estates. The name itself sounded peaceful, like a place where the loudest sound was a gentle breeze rustling through mature trees. It was the suburban dream, packaged and sold with a hefty price tag and an even heftier rulebook I'd skimmed and promptly forgotten. I'd bought the house, a modest but sturdy two-story colonial for its bones, its yard, and its profound, beautiful silence. It was, like every other house on the block, a study in 50 shades of taupe, a convent for the colorblind. But it was my taupe convent, and I was ready to add a little life to it, starting with the front door. I was cleaning my brush, humming a tune from a cheesy 80s movie, when I felt it. That prickly sensation on the back of your neck that says you're being watched. I glanced across the street. In the window of the immaculate beige house directly opposite, a pair of blinds twitched. I saw a flash of gray hair and the glint of glasses. A hand was moving, scribbling furiously onto what looked like a clipboard. Being a friendly new neighbor, I gave a big, goofy wave. The blinds snapped shut so fast I half expected to hear a guillotine sound effect. "Okay then," I muttered to my paintbrush, a little shy. I dismissed it. People were weird, especially people who had willingly chosen to live in a sea of architectural oatmeal. I was different. I was the splash of color, the hint of personality. I was the guy with the forest green door. I went inside, popped open a beer, and toasted my new life of blissful homeowner tranquility. I had no idea I had just fired the first shot in what would become the great, silent, and incredibly stupid beige war of Maple Creek Estates. The next few weeks would teach me that in the suburbs, tranquility is a privilege, not a right, and that some people will go to war over a gallon of paint. A few glorious, untroubled days passed. I set up my home office, arranged my furniture, and celebrated the sheer novelty of having a second bathroom. I was living the dream. Then came the letter. It wasn't in the mailbox, which would have been normal and far too subtle. No, this was personal. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope taped directly to the center of my beautiful green door. The tape was the aggressive, industrial kind that left behind a gummy, impossible-to-remove residue that, even before I read the contents, felt like the first real act of aggression. I peeled it off, cursing as a stripe of sticky film remained on the fresh paint. The envelope was addressed to Current Resident and bore the official-looking crest of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. It looked like a coat of arms designed by a committee who couldn't decide between a lawnmower and a beige paint swatch, so they just included both. Inside, the letter was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive legalese. "Dear Resident," it began, because using my actual name was apparently too much of a personal commitment. "It has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee that an unapproved modification has been made to the exterior of your property at 124 Willow Lane. Specifically, The frontal entryway portal, henceforth referred to as the front door, has been painted a non-sanctioned color, identified by our records as Evergreen Abyss. My eyebrows shot up. Evergreen Abyss? That sounded way more dramatic than the Forest Retreat listed on the can. It sounded like a place where elves went to die. I read on. As per the Maple Creek Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and Rs, Bylaw 7, Section C, Paragraph 4, all exterior paint modifications must be selected from the pre-approved community palette to ensure neighborhood harmony and aesthetic cohesion. Evergreen Abyss is not currently, nor has it ever been, a component of this palette. It went on to inform me that I had a rectification period of 14 days to repaint the door to an approved color. They had even helpfully included a list. The options were desert sand, gentle fawn, and slightly darker desert sand. I stared at the paper, a slow, disbelieving laugh bubbling up in my chest. This had to be a joke, a prank on the new guy. I checked the date. It wasn't April 1st. I looked out the window, half expecting to see a camera crew. Nothing. Just the endless, oppressive beige landscape of Maple Creek Estates. My amusement quickly curdled into annoyance. A door? They were honestly going to war over a door? I'd dealt with city noise, with crime, with landlords who were basically slumlords in nicer suits. I had moved here to escape petty nonsense, not to have it delivered to my door with industrial-grade tape. I crumpled the letter into a tight ball and tossed it into the recycling bin. They'll forget about it, I told myself. It was probably just some automated letter sent out by a bored retiree with a clipboard. Oh, how wrong I was. This wasn't an automated letter. This was a handwritten declaration of war from the beige-ocracy. And the bored retiree with the clipboard? I was about to meet her and her whole joyless council of war. The second letter arrived a week later, delivered in the same door-defiling manner. The tone had shifted from passively aggressive to actively threatening. The phrase, daily fines of $50, was now included, helpfully bolded and underlined. My 14-day rectification period was ticking down. It was clear this wasn't going to just go away. My dream of quiet, suburban life was being held hostage by the paint chip police. Fine. I would be the bigger man. I would be the reasonable new neighbor. I would go to their little meeting and explain the situation with logic and charm. I put on a collared shirt, combed my hair, and drove to the Maple Creek Community Center, ready to extend an olive branch. The room itself should have been a warning. It was a soul-crushing expanse of beige walls, beige linoleum, and beige folding chairs. The air smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. About 15 residents were scattered around the room, all looking varying degrees of bored and resentful. At the front, behind a long folding table, sat the holy trinity of homeowner oppression. The woman in the center was clearly the alpha. She was in her late 50s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed, unnaturally blonde hair and a sensible blazer that looked like it could repel small arms' fire. She wielded a wooden gavel with an air of someone who had fantasized about being a judge, but had to settle for being a suburban tyrant. To her right sat a man who looked like he'd been born frowning. Thin, bald, with glasses perched precariously on the end of his nose, he was hunched over a ledger, his pen moving with grim determination. This, I guessed, was the money man. And to her left, clipboard at the ready, was the woman from the window. Up close, she was smaller than I'd imagined, with bird-like features and eyes that darted around the room, cataloging every perceived infraction. She gave me a look that was a mixture of triumph and disdain. She had found her villain. The meeting of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association is now in session. the woman with the gavel announced, banging it with unnecessary force. "I'm Brenda, your president. This is Gary, our treasurer, and Mildred, our secretary." They went through a few excruciatingly dull agenda items. A dispute over sprinkler timings, a reminder about trash can visibility. I felt my life force draining away. Finally, Brenda looked down at her notes and peered over her glasses at me. "We have a new resident, Mr. Henderson, from 124 Willow Lane, here to discuss a bylaw violation." All eyes turned to me. I stood up, feeling like I was at my own parole hearing. "Hi, yes, that's me. Alex Henderson," I said, trying for a friendly, non-threatening smile. "Look, I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. I got the letters about my front door." Brenda nodded slowly, her expression unchanged. "There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Henderson. Your door is green." She said the word green like it was a contagious disease. "Right," I said. "And I get that there are rules. I'm new here, and I just wanted to add a little, character to the place." Brenda leaned into her microphone. "Character, Mr. Henderson, is a slippery slope to chaos. First a green door, then what? Wind chimes? A plastic flamingo? The bylaws are for the protection of everyone's investment. They ensure aesthetic cohesion." Gary, the treasurer, looked up from his ledger for the first time. Bylaw 7, Section C, Paragraph 4, clearly states all exterior paint modifications must be submitted via Form 12B and approved by the Architectural Review Committee, he droned, not making eye contact. The initial fine was $50. Due to continued non-compliance, the fine is now $100. I felt my charm offensive crumbling. "Look, can't we just be reasonable? It's a tasteful, dark green. It's not like I painted a mural of a dragon or something. It actually increases the curb appeal." Mildred let out a little scoff. "That is a matter of opinion," she chirped, making a note on her clipboard. I tried one last time. "I just moved here from the city. I invested my life savings into this house because I wanted to be part of a nice community. A community of people, not just a row of identical beige boxes. Can't we find a compromise?" Brenda gave me a thin, pitying smile. "The compromise, Mr. Henderson, is that you can choose between desert sand, gentle fawn, or slightly darker desert sand. You have 7 days left. Next item on the agenda." She banged her gavel. It was a dismissal. I stood there for a moment, stunned by the sheer, unyielding wall of bureaucracy. They weren't just inflexible. They were proud of it. They reveled in it. I walked out of that beige room, the stale coffee smell clinging to my clothes, and the last vestiges of my reasonable new neighbor persona evaporated. They wanted a war, fine. They were about to get one. The next week was a cold war fought on the suburban lawns of Willow Lane. The letters kept coming, each one more formal and threatening. The fine climbed from $100 to $200. One letter even included a grainy black-and-white photo of my front door, labeled Exhibit A, as if we were heading to the Supreme Court. Mildred, my personal KGB agent across the street, was now making a show of it, marching onto her lawn every morning with her clipboard and a disposable camera, the flash reflecting off my windows. My initial anger began to simmer into a kind of defiant, creative rage. If they wanted to play by the rules, I would too. But I'd find every single loophole, every ambiguity, every gray area, and I would exploit it with the dedication of a tax attorney. My first act of petty rebellion was small. I went to a garden supply store and bought a single, garish, hot pink plastic flamingo. The bylaws, I had noted in my feverish late-night reading, had a whole section on lawn ornaments. Flamingos were, of course, explicitly forbidden. However, the rule specified permanent or semi-permanent installation. It said nothing about temporary placement. So every morning before dawn, I'd place the flamingo in a new, prominent location on my lawn. One day it was peeking out from behind a bush. The next, it was standing sentinel by the mailbox. Another day, it was staring directly into Mildred's living room window. It was never in the same spot for more than 24 hours. They couldn't find me if it wasn't installed. It was driving them crazy. I could feel Mildred's hateful gaze burning a hole in my flamingo's plastic head. Next came the gnomes. The bylaws had a strange, hyper-specific rule about garden gnomes. No more than 3, and they could not exceed a height of 12 inches. It was so specific it was practically a challenge. I went online and found a supplier of the creepiest, most unsettling gnomes imaginable. Gnomes with chipped paint and dead, soulless eyes. I bought 3 of them, all exactly 11.5 inches tall, and created a small, horrifying tableau on my porch steps. These were pinpricks, small acts of defiance that gave me a sliver of satisfaction. But the fines for the door kept mounting. The total was now approaching $500. My peaceful protest wasn't changing their minds, it was just hardening their beige hearts. I decided to try one last time to appeal to reason. I found Brenda's number in the community directory and dialed, my stomach twisting in knots. She picked up on the second ring. Brenda speaking. Hi, Brenda, it's Alex Henderson from Willow Lane. There was a chilly silence on the other end. Yes? Brenda, this is insane, I said, my voice more pleading than I intended. We're almost at $500 in fines. It's a door. Are we really going to war over a gallon of paint? Her voice was as cold and hard as a granite countertop. Mr. Henderson, I've already explained the situation to you. The rules are the rules. They are what separates us from anarchy. We are a community of standards. Either you comply, or the fines will continue until we are forced to place a lien on your property. The choice is yours. And then she hung up. Click. I stood there in my kitchen, phone in hand, listening to the dial tone. A lien on my property. My dream house. My escape from the world. Being threatened because of a color. Something inside me snapped. The part of me that wanted to be reasonable, that wanted to compromise, that wanted to be a good neighbor, it just withered and died. I looked at the threatening letter on my counter. I looked at my beautiful, defiant, green door. Then I looked over at my workstation, at the giant monitor and the drawing tablet I used for my design work. An idea, a terrible, beautiful, magnificently petty idea, began to form in my mind. It started as a flicker, and then erupted into a full-blown blaze of malicious inspiration. They wanted me to change the color of my house. The letter didn't specify just the door. It was about exterior modification. Brenda's last words echoed in my head. The choice is yours. Fine, I whispered to the empty room, a slow, wicked grin spreading across my face. I'll comply. They wanted a new paint job. I was about to give them a masterpiece. The idea didn't just feel right. It felt like destiny. It was the perfect fusion of my professional skills and my newfound suburban rage. I wasn't just going to repaint. I was going to make a statement. A big, loud 2-story statement. They wanted me to change the color? I'd give them all the colors. They wanted to take issue with my aesthetic choices? I would create an aesthetic so bold, so specific, and so utterly personal that it would be beyond their comprehension. I wasn't going to fight them on their turf of bylaws and fines. I was going to drag them onto mine, the canvas. I spent the entire night fueled by coffee and righteous indignation. My design tablet, usually reserved for corporate logos and slick website layouts, became my weapon. The front of my house was a blank slate. My muse, the HOA board itself. I sketched with a feverish intensity I hadn't felt in years. They wanted to treat this neighborhood like a circus they were in charge of? Fine. I'd make them the main attraction. Brenda was the easiest. Her commanding presence, her gavel, her self-importance. She was born to be the ringmaster. I drew her with an exaggeratedly wide, condescending smile, a tiny top hat perched on her helmet of hair, and a whip in her hand. Her clown makeup was sharp and severe. Gary, the treasurer, the man who only saw the world in dollar signs and violations, was next. He became the sad, weeping Pierrot clown. I drew him with a massive, downturned frown, a single tear rolling down his cheek. But instead of a normal tear, it was a perfectly rendered, glistening dollar sign. In his hands, instead of a mandolin, I placed a broken abacus. And then there was Mildred, the neighborhood watch, the ever-present eyes across the street. She was the jester, the snitch. I drew her peeking out from behind a large, cartoonish circus tent flap, one eye wide and conspiratorial. I gave her enormous ears, perfect for eavesdropping, and a classic jester's hat with little bells on the end. The concept was perfect. It was malicious compliance in its highest form. It wasn't profane. It wasn't threatening. It was art. And most importantly, I was almost certain it was legal. I spent another hour scouring the 150-page PDF of the Maple Creek Estates CC and ours. My heart pounded as I searched for keywords. Mural, art, depiction, image, nothing. There were endless, mind-numbing regulations about paint colors, about siding materials, about fence heights, and about the maximum allowable height of a garden gnome. But the writers of these sacred texts, in all their beige-addled wisdom, had never considered the possibility that someone would paint a giant, satirical circus mural on the front of their house. It was a loophole big enough to drive a clown car through. A giddy, almost maniacal sense of joy washed over me. This was no longer about a green door. This was about principle. It was for every person who'd ever been told their grass was a quarter of an inch too long, or their trash cans were visible for 5 minutes too long. I was going to turn my house into a monument to their own absurdity, and it was going to be glorious. A vision is one thing, execution is another. I'm a digital artist. My canvases are pixels, my brushes are styluses. The last time I'd painted anything larger than a front door, it was a high school theater backdrop, and it had mostly ended up on my clothes. Painting a 2-story, photorealistic cartoon hybrid mural was far beyond my skill set. I needed a professional. More than that, I needed an accomplice. I spent the next morning calling local painting companies. The first 3 conversations were unhelpful. "Hi, I'm looking to get the front of my house painted." I'd start normally enough. "Sure thing. What color are you thinking?" "Well, it's more of a mural." "Okay, a landscape or something abstract?" "Sort of a portrait piece, of 3 clowns." Click. The third guy just laughed for a solid 10 seconds before hanging up. I was starting to lose hope when I found a listing for Sal's Custom Painting and More. The "and more" seemed promising. I called, and a gruff, gravelly voice answered on the first ring. "Sal's." "Hi, Sal. My name is Alex. I have a unique exterior painting job." "Kid, I've painted everything from biker bars to daycare centers. Try me." I took a deep breath. "I want to paint a mural on the front of my house, a caricature of my HOA board, as clowns." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I thought he'd hung up. Then, I heard a low chuckle. "You got a beef with the board, huh?" "You could say that." "All right," Sal said, the amusement clear in his voice. "I'm intrigued. I'll swing by this afternoon. See what we're working with." Sal arrived a few hours later in a paint-splattered Ford F-150 that looked like it had survived a war. He was a man built like a refrigerator, with a thick gray beard, hands the size of dinner plates, and a perpetually unimpressed expression that seemed to be his default state. He walked up to my house, looked at the green door, and grunted. "This the door they're crying about?" "The very one," I said. "Huh, nice color." I felt an immediate kinship with this man. I invited him inside and laid my master plan out on the dining room table. The digital sketches, the color palettes, the whole 9 yards. Sal stared at the drawings, stroking his beard. He looked at the ringmaster Brenda, then at the crying clown Gary, then at the peeking jester Mildred. He was silent for what felt like an eternity. His unimpressed expression never changed. My heart sank. Maybe this was too crazy, even for the and more guy. Finally, he tapped a thick finger on the sketch of Brenda. "You want her smile to be that punchable, or should we tone it down?" I broke into a massive grin. "As punchable as humanly possible." A slow smile spread across Sal's face, cracking his stoic facade. "I like it. I did a guy's whole garage to look like the surface of the moon once because his neighbor said it was an eyesore. This is better. This has got soul." We spent the next hour hashing out the details. We'd need scaffolding, high-quality exterior paint, and most importantly, secrecy. We couldn't just do this in the open. It had to be a shock and awe campaign. "Here's what we do," Sal said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "We put up a big framework, cover the whole front of the house in tarps. Tell them it's for dust control while we're power washing and prepping the siding. They'll be nosy, but they won't be able to see a thing." "And how long will it take?" I asked. 2 days, max, if we push it. We prep Friday, we paint all day Saturday, finish up the details Sunday morning. You and me. It'll be a masterpiece of spite." He quoted me a price. It was steep. "I'll pay double," I said without hesitation. "In cash." Sal's smile widened. He stuck out a paint-stained hand. "Kid, you've got yourself a contractor. Let's go paint some clowns." Friday afternoon, Sal's truck rumbled back up my driveway. The war was about to go from cold to hot. We spent the rest of the day erecting a massive, slightly ominous-looking structure of scaffolding and blue tarps that completely shrouded the front of my house from view. It looked like the place was under quarantine for a rare, house-eating fungus. The effect on the neighborhood was immediate. Dog walkers paused and stared. Cars slowed down as they passed. I could feel Mildred's eyes burning a hole through the blue vinyl from across the street. It was perfect. The suspense was building. Saturday morning, we started at dawn. Sal had a massive portable sound system, and within minutes, the muffled sounds of classic rock were echoing from behind the tarps. The air filled with the sharp, chemical smell of primer. "All right, art director," Sal yelled over a guitar solo. "Where do we start?" For the next 10 hours, we were a whirlwind of activity. I had the sketches printed out on large sheets, and I directed the whole operation like a general commanding a battlefield. Sal, for all his gruffness, was a true artist with a paint sprayer. He laid down the base colors with swift, efficient strokes, turning the bland beige siding into a vibrant circus backdrop. The work was exhilarating. Every stripe of the circus tent, every splash of color felt like a blow against the beige regime. We worked in a comfortable, focused silence, broken only by Sal's singing along to the radio and my occasional directions. "A little more condescension in Brenda's smirk, Sal," I'd yell up to him on the scaffolding. "You got it, boss." "Gary's tear needs to be a perfect gleaming $sign. "Copy that." Around noon, we had our first close call. I saw a shadow fall over the tarp at the bottom. "What's all this?" a nasally voice demanded from the other side. "This structure wasn't approved by the committee." It was Gary. My heart hammered in my chest. Sal, perched 10 feet up, froze mid-spray. I scrambled to the edge of the tarp and called through it, my voice dripping with false cheerfulness. "Just some necessary exterior maintenance, Gary. Doing a full power wash and repaint just like you guys wanted. Following the rules." There was a suspicious silence. "Why all the tarps?" "Dust and overspray," I yelled back. "Don't want to get any unapproved colors on the neighbors' properties. Just being considerate." He grunted, unconvinced, but after a moment, his shadow moved away. I gave Sal a thumbs up. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow and went back to painting. As the sun began to set, the mural truly came to life. The characters were no longer just sketches. They were vibrant, larger-than-life figures. Brenda, the ringmaster, presided over the front door, her whip curling menacingly toward the doorbell. Gary, the sad clown, sat slumped under the living room window, his dollar-sign tear looking almost wet in the fading light. And Mildred, the jester, peeked mischievously from the corner of the house, her giant ear aimed squarely at the street. We ordered a couple of large pizzas and ate them right there on the porch, hidden behind our blue vinyl curtain. We were two co-conspirators, exhausted and paint-splattered, admiring our handiwork. "You know," Sal said, taking a massive bite of pepperoni, "I've been doing this for 30 years, and this is, without a doubt, the most insane, most beautiful, most passive-aggressive thing I have ever had the pleasure of painting." "I couldn't have done it without you, Sal," I said, raising my beer can in a toast. We worked for another few hours under portable floodlights, adding the final details and highlights that made the mural pop. By the time we called it a night, it was past midnight. The masterpiece was complete, a silent, colorful rebellion waiting for the sun to rise. I barely slept a wink, my mind buzzing with a mixture of terror and pure, unadulterated glee. Tomorrow, the circus was coming to town. Sunday morning broke clear and bright. It was a perfect day for a revolution. Sal arrived just as the first rays of sun were hitting the top of the tarps. We didn't say much, just shared a thermos of coffee and a look of nervous excitement. This was it, the moment of truth. "Ready to pull the curtain, boss?" Sal asked, a grin playing on his lips. "Let's give the people their show, Sal." With a theatrical flair that the moment deserved, we began to untie the ropes. We worked our way around the structure, letting the massive blue tarps fall away one by one, revealing the mural in sections. First, a corner of the big top tent. Then, Mildred's gossiping jester face. Then Gary's money-crying misery. And finally, with the last tarp falling to the grass with a gentle whoosh, the full, magnificent, two-story glory of Ringmaster Brenda. We stood back on the lawn, side by side, like proud parents. It was even better than I had imagined. The morning sun made the colors explosive against the backdrop of the relentlessly beige neighborhood. It was a technicolor scream in a library of taupe. For a few minutes, the world was quiet. The only sound was a distant bird chirping, blissfully unaware of the aesthetic bomb that had just been detonated on Willow Lane. Then, the reactions began. The first was a jogger, a man in his 40s who ran the same route every morning. He came around the corner, glanced at my house, and did a full-on cartoon-style stumble, catching himself just before he hit the pavement. He stood there, mouth agape, breathing heavily. Next came a teenager on a skateboard. He skidded to a halt, his eyes wide. He pulled out his phone and, with the reverence of someone filming a UFO, started recording. Across the street, my friendly neighbor Sarah, the one who always gave a polite wave, peeked out her window. I saw her hand fly to her mouth to stifle a laugh. She caught my eye and gave me a subtle, enthusiastic thumbs up. I had an ally in the silent majority. But I was waiting for the main event, and I didn't have to wait long. Mildred's blinds across the street snapped open. There was a pause of what I can only assume was pure, system-shocking disbelief. Then the blinds slammed shut. I imagined a frantic, panicked phone call taking place. Less than 5 minutes later, Brenda's silver minivan came screaming around the corner, taking it on 2 wheels. It screeched to a halt directly in front of my house, the tires protesting loudly. The driver's side door flew open, and Brenda emerged, dressed in her Sunday best, a pastel pink pantsuit. She got out, took one look at the mural, at her own face, 10 feet tall, rendered in clown makeup with a condescending smirk, and her face went on a journey. It started with confusion, shifted to disbelief, cycled through horror, and finally landed on a shade of apoplectic rage so pure it was almost impressive. Her face turned a shade of crimson that wasn't on the HOA's approved palette. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, the words tearing through the quiet Sunday morning air. I had been waiting for this. I was sitting on my porch steps, calmly sipping a fresh cup of coffee. I took a slow, deliberate sip before answering. "Good morning, Brenda," I said cheerfully. "I'm just complying with the HOA's directive. You told me to change the color of my house, so I did." I gestured with my coffee mug towards the wall. "Do you like it? I think Sal, my painter, really captured your essence." Her whole body was vibrating with fury. "You have defaced your property. This is a monstrosity." "I disagree," I said, taking another sip. "I think it adds character. Isn't that what we were talking about?" "I am calling the police," she sputtered, fumbling for her phone. "This is harassment. It's slander in paint form." I gave her my most serene smile. "It's art, Brenda, and art is subject to interpretation." Sure enough, about 15 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled slowly down the street and parked behind Brenda's poorly parked minivan. By now, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered at a safe distance, pretending to check their mail or weed their flower beds while openly staring. Gary and Mildred had arrived as backup for Brenda, and the 3 of them stood in a tight, furious huddle on the sidewalk. 2 officers got out of the car. One was young, with a sharp haircut and an alert, tech-savvy look about him. Let's call him Officer Evans. The other was older, probably a few years from retirement, with a weary face that suggested he had seen every form of human stupidity and was thoroughly unimpressed by all of them. This was Officer Miller, and I immediately knew he was my only hope. Brenda descended upon them like a hawk on a field mouse. "Officers, thank God you're here. Arrest this man," she screeched, pointing a trembling finger at me. I gave a polite little wave from my porch. Officer Miller held up a hand, a gesture of infinite patience. "Okay, ma'am, slow down. Just tell me what the problem is." "The problem?" she shrieked, gesturing wildly at the mural. "That is the problem. He's painted this obscene circus on his house to mock me, to mock the entire Homeowners Association board," Gary chimed in, brandishing a copy of the bylaws like a sacred text. "It's a clear violation of the community's aesthetic standards, officer." Officer Miller let out a long, slow sigh. He turned his head and looked, really looked, at the mural for the first time. He stared at it for a good 10 seconds. His expression didn't change, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, just for a second. Officer Evans, standing behind him, was not as subtle. He had his hand over his mouth, and his shoulders were shaking slightly. Miller turned back to Brenda, his face a perfect mask of professional calm. "And who are these, performers supposed to be?" "It's us," Mildred squeaked, looking horrified. "He's turned us into clowns." Officer Miller nodded slowly, as if processing a complex piece of evidence. He then turned and walked up my driveway, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. Evans followed, his eyes still glued to the wall. "Sir, is this your house?" Miller asked, his voice a tired, gravelly monotone. "Yes, officer. Good morning," I said. "And you painted this mural?" "Commissioned it, technically," I replied. "I'm a patron of the arts." Miller's mouth twitched again. He was fighting a losing battle. "And these characters? They're meant to be caricatures of your HOA board?" "They are artistic representations inspired by individuals who have made a significant impact on my life recently," I said carefully. "Any resemblance to actual persons, living or clowning, is a matter of artistic interpretation." Behind Miller, Evans let out a sound that was halfway between a cough and a snort. Miller shot him a look. He then turned back to the fuming trio on the sidewalk. "Ma'am," he said to Brenda, his voice carrying across the lawn, "as far as I can tell, no law has been broken here." Brenda looked like she'd been slapped. "What do you mean, no law? It's public indecency. It's harassment." "There's no profanity," Miller countered, ticking points off on his fingers. "There are no direct threats. It's on his own private property. It might be in terrible taste." He glanced at me. "No offense, son." "None taken," I said. "But it's not a criminal matter," he finished. "I can't arrest a man for what you perceive to be bad art. This sounds like a civil issue for your HOA to figure out. My hands are tied." Officer Evans finally spoke up, pulling out his phone. "I'm just going to get a quick photo of the, situation for the report." The angle he was holding the phone at looked suspiciously like a selfie angle, with the mural prominent in the background. Brenda was left sputtering, her arguments exhausted, her authority useless. Miller tipped his hat to me. "Have a good day, sir. Try to, keep the peace." "I'm the most peaceful guy on this block, officer," I said with a straight face. As the police car pulled away, a smattering of applause broke out from the gardening neighbors. Brenda, Gary, and Mildred stood there, utterly defeated, the giant, smiling and weeping clown faces of their own making looming over them. It was a checkmate painted in primary colors. The revolution, it turns out, was televised. And also TikToked, tweeted, and turned into a meme. The teenager on the skateboard had, in fact, been recording. His video captioned, "My neighbor is an absolute legend #HOA wars, #malicious compliance," went viral before the police had even left my street. By Sunday evening, it had 500,000 views. By Monday morning, the story had been picked up by local news blogs. By noon, a news van from a local TV station was parked in front of my house, right where Brenda's minivan had been. A reporter with impossibly perfect hair and a microphone stood on my lawn, narrating the story with dramatic flair, the clown mural providing a stunningly absurd backdrop. They asked me for an interview, and I accepted. I didn't gloat. I didn't name names. I just calmly and politely laid out the facts, framing myself as the bewildered but rule-following new homeowner. "They sent me letters demanding I change my house color," I said to the camera, feigning innocence. "The rules are the rules, so I complied. I believe in being a good neighbor and following the bylaws." The camera zoomed in on my earnest face, then panned up to the 10-foot-tall clown caricature of Brenda. The juxtaposition was comedic gold. I became a minor local celebrity overnight, a folk hero for the cul-de-sac. People drove by my house just to take pictures. My story was shared in anti-HOA Facebook groups across the country, where I was hailed as the Picasso of petty and the Rembrandt of revenge. The effect on the HOA board was devastating. They were humiliated on a public stage. Their power, which was built on intimidation and the enforcement of tedious, soul-crushing rules, evaporated under the bright, warm light of public ridicule. Other residents of Maple Creek, empowered by my stand, began their own quiet rebellions. A forbidden wind chime appeared here, an unapproved mailbox there. An anonymous source leaked stories to the local news about Brenda's other tyrannical crusades, including a multi-year war against a family who wanted to install a basketball hoop. The board, once so vocal and aggressive, was forced into silent, seething retreat. They stopped sending letters. They stopped holding meetings. Brenda's minivan was no longer seen patrolling the neighborhood. The beige curtain of fear had been lifted. The circus had been so effective, it had scared the clowns right out of town. A week after the story went viral, another crisp, cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox. This time it wasn't taped to my door. It was delivered like a normal piece of mail. My heart beat a little faster as I opened it. The tone was different. Gone was the legalese and the passive aggression. This letter was humble, defeated. It stated that after a special emergency review, the board had voted to rescind all outstanding fines related to the property at 124 Willow Lane. Furthermore, it announced that they were proposing a new amendment to the bylaws to be voted on at the next meeting that would officially expand the approved exterior color palette. The letter specifically mentioned that the proposal would include a range of tasteful accent colors, including but not limited to dark greens and deep blues. It was a total unconditional surrender. A few days later, Sal's paint-splattered truck rumbled back into my driveway. He got out, a wide grin on his face, and handed me an invoice. At the top, instead of Sal's custom painting, he had printed Clown Mural Removal Services. "Heard you won the war," he said, leaning against his truck and looking up at the mural, which had already become a local landmark. "We won the war, Sal," I corrected him. "So, you here to give me a quote?" Sal raised an eyebrow. "A quote for what? An encore?" "Nope," I said, looking up at the masterpiece of spite. "A quote to paint over it. Back to the original beige." Sal looked genuinely shocked. "Are you serious? After all that? You're just gonna cover it up? People love this thing." "I know," I said with a smile. "But the mural served its purpose. It was a statement. It was a weapon. And the war is over." I glanced at my front door, still a perfect, defiant shade of forest green. "Besides, I got what I wanted." He shook his head, laughing. "You are one strange fella, Alex. But all right, one beige box coming up." As Sal's crew began setting up their ladders, I saw a familiar silver minivan drive slowly down the street. It was Brenda. She saw me standing in the yard, and for a moment our eyes met. There was no anger left in her face, just a weary resignation. I gave her a small, polite wave. She didn't wave back, but she didn't glare either. She just pressed her foot on the accelerator and drove away, disappearing around the corner. I had my green door. I had my peace and quiet. The fines were gone, and the beige-ocracy had been toppled. I learned that sometimes, to get a little bit of tranquility in a world full of ridiculous rules, you first have to get a little bit ridiculous yourself. You have to be willing to send in the clowns,